Welcome. Glad you joined us today for this webinar, this live webinar happening from the BC Yukon District Office. And we're so glad that you joined us here today. We're talking today about pastor and staff relationships live in the Elephant Room. And so we just want to open up some great discussion today. I'm Ben Johnson, Next Generation Ministries Director here in our district. And then we have Dave Soames, our Assistant Superintendent. We're going to be moderating today our panel. And I just want to introduce you quickly to our panel today. We've got Jim Lucas, Pastor Jim Lucas at CLCC Church in Abbotsford joining us today. We've got Pastor Chris Luff, who's also on staff at CLCC. And Chris is the junior youth pastor. And then right up here, we've got Lucas Mitchell, and he's on staff as youth young adult pastor at Surrey Pentecostal Church. And then Dan Eagle at the back, and he's lead pastor at Connaught Heights Church in New Westminster.
Pastor-staff relationships, it's a fascinating subject. Some of our best moments and memories are often related to who we're working with. Some of our most difficult memories are often related to who we're working with. We were having fun before this recording. Lucas, you were talking about the time you drove a bus into the back of somebody else and how awful and awkward that is for a team to get their mind around a damaged car. And Chris, you were saying about the same of some kind of car accident. I was reflecting too of the time I pushed a youth right through the glass, the whole glass of the front of our church, the glass, and the senior pastor came running out, and there was glass everywhere, and it was disaster 101.
And you still had a job?
Pardon me?
And you still had a job?
I still had a job. It was so funny. I've never seen that guy mad, but man, there was a problem, and I caused the problem. But awesome. The other side of it, as I reflect on being a senior pastor, 28 years old, and all of a sudden I had a staff, and I actually had no idea really what to do. Thinking about the first pastoral transition. The youth pastor comes and says, I'm moving on to the big church down the highway, and I'm going, I didn't handle it well. Thinking about a building program that we were in and some of the dishonor actually that I was not able to find within myself because of insecurities. Not handling staff well on my end caused there to be frustration on not only the pastor but the pastor's family, the husband, the wife. And I look back at that and say how different it could have been and how better it could have been. So in our conversation today, we want to unpack some real issues, and I know that from your experiences, you're able to kind of lead us in that way. One of the things that I reflect on, and Jim, maybe you could be a first responder to this, is there's often things that a lead pastor wants to say to their staff, and because of their inability to figure out what to say or their lack of courage to say it, subjects go unaddressed. What would be your comment on that?
Dave, I think that primarily the lead pastor wants to communicate to the staff, no matter if they're junior staff or they're associate staff or whatever, a couple of things that are really, really important. And the first thing would be you got to keep growing. You just can't come and relax and say, well, I've learned everything I have to learn and I'm just going to work on that the rest of my pastoral ministry. And I always talk about three areas that they have to grow in. First of all, they have to grow in their administration. It's not okay for the youth guy to say, oh, I'm not an administrator. Sorry, right? I'm not good at that. You got to get good at that. You've got to be able to do a budget, right? You've got to be able to know how much that youth retreat will cost and how much to charge the kids so that you can recoup the cost. If that doesn't happen, then everybody's in trouble. Everybody's in trouble. And not only does the youth department look bad, but the board looks at the lead pastor and saying, what are you doing, right? So first of all, you got to administrate. You got to improve your administration skills. Secondly, you got to improve your communication skills. Everybody does. No matter how old we are, I'm still working on that. Got to improve my communication skill. And that's not just preaching. That's when I talk to my board. That's when I talk to the youth. That's when I talk to the staff. How do I improve my ability to communicate what I need to communicate? How do I grow? What am I reading that will help me grow? And then not only that, but relationships. Relationships have to grow. My relationship with God has to improve. My relationship with people, I have to deepen. I have to broaden my relationships. And so I want all the staff people to know these are the areas where you're going to have to grow. If you're going to stay on staff here, you're going to have to grow in each of these areas. No matter where you are, no matter what position you hold, you've got to be concerned about relationship stuff. You've got to be concerned about communication stuff, and you've got to be concerned about administration.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, you've been a part of a staff at CLCC for quite a while, and how has performance reviews helped you grow as a leader?
I would say, especially on that communication end, where performance reviews end up helping me understand what's being expected of me, as well as Jim getting to hear what I'm passionate about, what I feel has been a sense of accomplishment, where there has been success, where there have been challenges. So there's that dialogue in that review, that reflection, and as well as that challenge, because we all like the idea of growing, but when push comes to shove, we do need the shove often to grow. And so those reviews is again like seeing, okay, well, now at the end of all this, where do you want to go next? What's the next step? We do these KPI, key performance indicators, where it's like, okay, what's in the next 6 months? Where's the next step? And so that way, together we work that out. Where do I want to see myself go to further the kingdom in my specific ministry? And so from there, then you go, okay, now I'm pushing towards that. And so that helps again to grow in this admin, communication, relationships areas.
Dan, you as a lead pastor have had staff, I'm sure, that has required of you to address issues that are hard to bring up. Why is it difficult? So we talk about performance reviews. We talk about how as Chris is saying, how we champion that, we get excited, but it's not always that easy. Why is it difficult to confront a staff member who's not performing well?
I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, in me as the lead pastor, I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to be. I want to be encouraging. I want to be affirming. And in these moments, I feel like I have to be the bad guy. And I have to bring up maybe a behavior that needs to be corrected or something that has gone wrong. And so I have to struggle with that and wrestle with that myself and make sure that the spirit in which I come across, I'm not being a jerk, but that the reason I'm bringing this up is for the benefit of that staff member as well as the benefit of the church. So both of those things. So that's important. The other thing is on the other side, the scripture says that an offended brother is harder to win back than a walled city. And I don't want to offend my staff member. And we've heard stories of that where a youth pastor or assistant pastor has been offended by the senior pastor, and all of a sudden walls start going up, and that staff member begins to shut out the senior pastor, and dialogue and relationship basically ends. And so if the person isn't willing to receive some correction, or I give that correction in a spirit, maybe that I need to say to the Lord, sorry, and maybe to that staff member, sorry, it can be a problem. So those would be the two main areas, is just what's going on internally in my heart, and then making sure that I'm not creating something in that staff member that would cause them to put up those walls that all of a sudden now I can't break through.
Yeah. Jim, I know that you lead a team that is very intentional about performance reviews, and Chris has talked, as he's on your team, a little bit about the benefit of that. Why is that such an important matter for your leadership? And the second question is, who evaluates you?
Good questions. Answer the first question is that I think performance reviews are so important because they help us make minor adjustments along the way. If you waited 2 years for a new pastor before you sat down and talked with them about their performance, there could be a whole whack of things. And they would be overwhelming. The person would go out of the room feeling completely discouraged, completely deflated, like they're a complete failure. But after 3 months, if you sit down with the new youth pastor and say, well, how's it going? Let's talk about this, let's talk about that. You can make those minor course corrections. And if you deflect the course just a couple of degrees at the beginning, you're going to end up in a totally different destination. But if you leave that for a year, wow, there's a huge deflection that needs to take place, and there's a lot of hurt. And so I've always found that our First of all, the first time you review someone, they're very nervous coming into the room. I remember, very nervous. Well, what's going to happen? What's he going to say? What have I done wrong? It's those. But I think our performance reviews have been positive, right? Do you feel affirmed after we talk?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you definitely have that sense of nervous. You're like, but then, am I going to get fired? But yeah, after all, it is very affirming and very life-giving, because it's like, okay, we're proud of what you've done so far. Now let's look forward to what's next.
See, a lot of guys, a lot of teams struggle with review in a church context, because there's different end zones, there's different measurables. So thematically, what is reviewed thematically in your in the format in which you use to evaluate performance? What are the themes? I mean, you can't control how many people come to Christ. You can't control if your church is going to grow.
Yeah.
You can't control how much offering is going to come in. There's things out of our hand.
Yeah.
But there's things in our hand. So what are the things you guys evaluate?
I think it's really important in evaluations for the staff person to set the standard, not the lead pastor to set the standard for them.
Good.
So our evaluations would be, Chris, what needs to happen in the junior high youth group over this next 6 months that's going to advance the mission of the kingdom of God here at CLCC?
Okay.
What needs to happen to improve it? And then he tells me, and we write that down. And that's the standard I hold him to.
Yeah.
It's not my standard, it's his standard. And then I basically say to him, you can do anything you want to make that happen. Nothing illegal, nothing imprudent, and nothing immoral.
Yeah.
But you get that done, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we always say. We will do anything short of sinning, right, to win people to Christ. And you're free. So he cannot say to me later, well, Jim, I would have done it, but my hands were tied. You put so many rules around what I needed to do. You wouldn't let me move the youth group. The night of the meeting, you wouldn't let me, So I have nothing to say about that. I only want you to do what you've committed to do from our last review. And have you done it? That's the big question. Have you done it?
And who evaluates you?
The board. My leadership council evaluates me. And they evaluate me not only on my performance, but on the performance of all my staff.
Okay.
So the buck stops here, right? If these guys mess up, guess who they look to? They look to me.
So let me just jump in here. This is great, and obviously you empower Chris to take leadership and to go for it, and that's awesome. Lucas, let me ask you a question. You're on a staff working with a pastor, and you have in the past worked on a church staff. What happens when your vision, or maybe there's other areas that you just seem to kind of bump into roadblocks, or there's conflict? Like, do you ever feel that as a staff pastor, like, you want to go for it, you got a vision, and then you hit kind of a roadblock or a conflict on your team? Do you ever feel that? Talk about that.
Perhaps, but oftentimes I think that's a good indicator of other things going on in a staff. And so that would be, if I felt like I was coming to that place, that's a good indicator that we're not communicating very well. That's a good indicator that I'm not being very real with my lead pastor, with my team members. So oftentimes I feel like when you communicate well and you talk those things through, and you have a safe place where you can talk your heart and vision, like even in reviews, like you're talking about, you're up, what are you doing, what do you need to do, those conversations, oftentimes that shouldn't be an issue in many ways. I mean, there's the extreme, and then there's, the extreme would be that perhaps you're under leadership, and I believe in submission to leadership. I believe God places, lead pastors, board, you're to submit to authority. And so basically you got to pray. You got to pray about, if this can happen, and this is my passion, this is where I feel God leading me, can I go there here, or do I need to go elsewhere? Or is this a season of me just learning submission, authority, all of that, and a good time to reevaluate those passions?
Yeah, because sometimes I hear from different people, I feel very passionate about where I'm called and where God's called me to go, but I feel like I've hit a bit of a ceiling. Like, I feel like the leadership, either isn't giving me the room to be able to expand, or I've been a youth pastor for a number of years, but things are changing in my heart. Chris, have you ever felt like that, like your current position, and then you feel like, okay, you know what, God's calling me something broader, or I want to take more leadership within the church as a whole rather than just being a part of leading a ministry, because maybe God's changing things in you. How do you deal with that? And do you ever feel conflict with some of those things inside?
Well, for myself, I guess I'm kind of odd in the sense that I feel like I could be a youth pastor for life. Junior high, I love them, and youth and senior high. So for myself, I've had a little bit of shifting, but for the most part, it's been like, no, I want to stick with this. There has been quite a few shifts on our staff, though, and from that being, like based on, my passions, like. Just some of our guys have gone from senior high youth to the worship pastor, or senior high to young adults, or so there have been shifts, kind of where it's like, okay, well, we have room, we want to keep this staff member, and so let's based on where God's shifting your calling and your gifts and your passion, let's find room for that, and often that will have I shifted from junior high to junior high, senior high because of one of our other staff members shifting a bit out of senior high, and so yeah. So
it's back to those communication points, and probably the reviews that you guys set up help a lot of those communications take place. Dan, let me ask you a question. As a pastor of your church and working with staff, how do you allow and help your staff members kind of feel more part of the whole? Because sometimes what I hear also from youth pastors is, I'm in this kind of area of the church, or even children's pastors, for example. I'm in the basement. That's my volunteer group. I barely even get up to the service up front. And sometimes there's a sense of disconnect, or like silos, ministry silos, that people feel trapped in sometimes as a staff pastor. How do you, as a senior pastor, help your staff feel more part of the whole vision or the whole church? Because sometimes that can bump a bit.
Well, I think those times as an entire staff coming together in a staff meeting sometimes helps that. But I think that conversation, the going for coffee and saying, hey, I want to run this by you. What do you think? And sometimes involving them in what is your idea, picking their brain. Here's what I'm thinking, and the difficult part of that is if I'm asking for your opinion, somewhere along the line I have to implement something, or else they'll just stop telling me anything. But I think that conversation, that involving, that listening, sometimes just listening, talking about those things, and then recognition, involvement, trying to involve that individual staff member in different aspects of the church life, and acknowledging them. Because instead of just being hidden away, bringing them to the forefront and rejoicing and celebrating what they're doing.
Years ago, you both worked together, and I'm thinking you're related, right? Because of people and marrying. I worked for a season with my brother-in-law, family dynamics. So can you unpack that a little bit? Is that an added dimension to what Ben's questioning about conflict? Like, how's it look? You got family. You're working in the office, and then you're at home together watching the hockey game.
Well, yeah. When we hired Lucas, he was single and worked on a vacation Bible school with my daughter, and romance took place that summer. So I think it was within the first year that you were there, that you were there about a year without being my son-in-law. So that sometimes was more challenging in the dating years and in the when they were courting, if that makes sense, because I think you ate at our house a lot more than you did once you were married every night. So I think one thing that we did do well was we separated church life and family life, if that makes sense. We did our best not to bring church life into the dinner table conversation. We weren't always successful, but I think we tried hard at not doing that. The other thing that I think was a positive of that is, I said that on when you got married, we already love you, and now we love you as family. And but thankfully that love was already there, the respect was already there. But it does make a couple of challenges in terms of just separating those things. What do you think?
Well, Dan would always talk about he had to cross. We had at that time had to cross the Port Mann Bridge to get back to Surrey for New West, and And that was kind of like the representation of, okay, I'm crossing this bridge. I'm leaving work behind, and I'm going into home now, and so that really helped. I think just that was actually pretty cool. Every time I cross that bridge, I'd be thinking about that. And even today, I live 8-minute walk from my church now, but I have this little bridge that I cross that's like on my walk, and I just kind of think about that. Okay, I'm leaving church now. I'm going home, and it was different. Like, it was different. It's a different dynamic, definitely. But you have to be really intentional about that dynamic. You can't just like ignore it, because if you ignore it, then it can cause a lot of stress, you know, because it's a different dynamic.
Did you ever call him Dad in the office?
No.
Still doesn't.
No.
Or from the platform? Do you ever?
Yeah.
Pastor Dad, come on out. Didn't happen.
Pastor Dad Eagle.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think one of the issues that also is difficult on staff is that often the other pastors than the lead pastor get a lot of hassle or difficulties from board members. A board member has a kid in the youth group, and you have to discipline that kid, right? And then that comes up at the next board meeting where dad's present, but you're not present to defend yourself, right? Or to explain exactly what happened, because the dad has only heard one half of the conversation, right? He didn't know what the kid was really doing in the broom closet when you hauled him out and gave him a timeout, right? So that's broom closet stuff
And
happened in our church, right? Yeah. But how we try to solve that is that we talk in our church about our leadership team. And the leadership team is the elected leaders as well as all the staff and all the spouses of the staff. So when we get together for a retreat, our leadership team is spouses from the most junior part-time person to the guy who's been elected and has been on the board for 15 years, right? And we all get together and we all pray together and we talk about vision. And they get an opportunity to speak directly as leaders to the youth guys, to the children's ministry people, and they become friends. And they feel that we're all in this together. Yeah. We own the vision together. And so I never have a board member saying anything negative about staff people because they're friends. You know what I mean? It's hard to say negative things about family members, about people that you can feel are on your same side. They understand the problems that you're having. So when you broaden the leadership team to include the staff and the elected leaders, I think you deflect a lot of that tension.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I'm glad you talked about spouses, because sometimes that can be a real challenge in a staffing relationship. And I think I've just found that when there's not clear communication, what is expected of, my wife or my spouse in a ministry context. Dan, how do you work with that? Like, as far as if you were to bring on a staff member, how do you say, okay, I'm hiring you and not your wife, for example, or I'm hiring both of you together? Like, how do we communicate that? Because that can be a real point of frustration.
Well, presently we're praying for a wife for our staff member.
Yeah, okay. Great.
For our youth pastor, and our other staff member is single as well. So I don't really have that dynamic presently. Usually what we've done is we try to communicate that we're hiring that staff person, and that spouse is welcome to be involved in areas of ministry, depending on that person's passion. And so in the past, other staff members, their spouses have been highly involved in the ministry, in the areas of their passion, and I think that that's important to release them, that they're a volunteer. Now, having said that, there is expectation upon them, whether we want to believe it or not. There's expectation for them to come alongside of their spouse, to be there. Sometimes they receive criticism, especially if somebody's unhappy with their husband or their wife, and sometimes they have to feel that. And so just coming alongside, giving them permission to follow the passions that God has put in their heart, I think that's the key.
Yeah, and also, the last time I was interviewed, I was clear about that. And I think that's okay to be clear about that. So I just want to say, like, in this process of interview, that my wife, you're not getting a 2-for-1 here. You're hiring me, and my wife will get involved as she sees fit. Now, my wife is a go-getter, and now she's a children's pastor part-time. So, I mean, obviously she got involved. But that expectation needs to kind of just be communicated, even in interviews. to just be open about that and have that as one of your own boundaries as well, to protect your family, and then that expectation can't grow and can't kind of see the light of day in any kind of disunity or.
There's a major change in the last 15 years in associate staff wives and their roles, in that now most associate staff pastors' wives are involved in a profession where they are probably making more money than their husband in ministry. They are nurses, they are accountants, they are working in some profession, right? And so these women have their own careers separate from their husband's career. And expectations, like, she's working full time, she's got young children at home, and boy, that has changed expectations of what we expect from that lady in ministry. Plus, it certainly changes the fluid dynamics of how that guy can respond to calls. Because he comes home and says, I'm really not comfortable in this particular setting. I'd like to go to Prince George, right? Because there's a great opening up there. And she says, I'm not leaving. How can I go to Prince George? I have a career here, right? I'm teaching school. I can't leave the school district, or I lose all of my seniority and I'll go back to teach. There's those 15, 20 years ago, that just wasn't a reality for us. Now it's a big part of decisions that younger, next generation people are making about careers.
And she doesn't play the piano, so.
Jim, let's keep unpacking gender roles. You have on your staff men and women. And as a lead pastor, do you respond appropriately or differently to either male or female on your staff?
Yeah, that's always a tension. I always feel closer to the guys than I do to the girls on staff, because we can we go out for lunch a lot together, and I'm not afraid to go for lunch with him. With this guy alone, right, with no one else. I would never do that with a female staff person. And so there is distance between myself and the females on staff. I feel that. They come to our joint staff things together. And accountability happens lady to lady. Like, we just set this up. We constantly have to work in this. They all have to have accountability partners on staff.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Each of them has to have a partner that they're working with on staff so they can share their life, talk about their issues, family issues, marriage issues, children issues, sexual issues, whatever's going on in their life. And, of course, my lady staff has to meet with another lady staff. So we have to link that up to make sure that they're doing that. And then I have to follow up to ask them the hard question, are you meeting? Right? Are you doing it? Who's your accountability partner? And how often have you met? So it is different. It's difficult and different.
Sorry, I would add, as far as watching our staff grow as well, is like at this point we have a large enough female staff that there's definitely there's this female camaraderie among our staff. A few years back, when it was a smaller number, that was a little trickier. When it was there was only two of them. Thankfully, they were both good friends. But then once you had a third in there, and so as it's gotten bigger, because when you have such a dominant male staff and then the female staff, because you need the partnerships, and so that played a big part as well. Depending on how many women to men you have, or women and men in your staff, I think plays a big part.
Let's talk about honor for a few minutes. Honoring each other on staff. What are things that you intentionally do to honor? So a staff member would honor their primary leader, the primary leader honoring their staff. What are practical things? Honor needs to be part of the fabric in which we interact with each other. Do you have any examples? Do you agree? What are you thinking about the word honor, honoring one another?
I think part of honor, the first thing that comes to my mind is situations where people want to talk badly or in a negative light towards your lead pastor or your other staff members. And to honor for me is to protect that relationship. And so in those moments, I just say, go talk to him. Like, why are you talking to me? I'm not him. You need to talk to him. So being in open communication, though, beyond that. So then, going to that lead pastor and going, hey, so just give you a head. I had this discussion and I directed them to you, and I just want to be completely open about it. because I respect you and your authority. I'm following you. I honor you, and I'm in no way going to undermine anything. And so I think in a big practical way, that would be a practical way, life of the church, to honor your lead pastor, to be really open about those things and willing to go there, even though sometimes it's hard, but it's necessary.
I sometimes, when I'm talking to our staff and we're in the office, doors shut, what goes on here is confidential. And I think that is another way of honoring. If they're sharing a struggle, I'm not going to take that struggle and exploit it. I'm not going to use it against them. So I think that's another way. Another thing is, we look at our children and we know they know we love them, but do we always tell them? And sometimes in honoring staff is just that, with a genuine heart, saying, I do appreciate you. I am happy you are on my staff. I think that goes a long way sometimes.
Affirmation.
The affirmation part. Because especially if you've had that point where you have to tell them what you didn't like or that thing that you had to correct, it's important that they know that you are happy that they are on your staff, that you do care for them, that you do believe that God has called them, that you do believe that God can use them, that you're passionate about their ministry and about them as individuals. I think that goes a long way in honoring. Rather than I'm just using you because I have this need for children and you're going to plug the need. No, I really care about you and I care about your ministry and I affirm that. I think that goes a long way.
For sure. Just to add what Lucas was saying, as far as when people are confronting you about another staff member, lead, or whoever else, just that honor, that loyalty. The way I often see it is giving the benefit of the doubt. So when someone's sharing something, you're like, because there's something to be said about respecting what they're sharing as well. And so I'll often just be like, to temper that, it's like, well, again, saying, there's two sides, there's, giving them the benefit of the doubt and almost trying to help them see that, you need to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's bring that to them and see, kind of what more was going on. And that way you're both, you're maintaining that loyalty to your staff team. You're also hearing what's being said from the person, and then you're also hopefully getting a chance to help resolve it, because then you bring it together and say, you're almost facilitating. And so I find that's really important.
Let me jump in. This is the elephant room, and so let's talk about jealousy. What about jealousy on a church staff, between staff members? Maybe even a sense of maybe even a young pastor, the youth ministry is growing. There's favor. There's momentum. Is there ever a sense of like, wow, this is kind of getting out of my control? Guys are feeling their wings are being clipped back. They're interpreting it as, well, they're just threatened by my ministry, whether it's between staff members, senior pastor or staff, or between staff pastors themselves being favored over another. Talk about that.
Well, one thing, I often use the illustration of curling, just because I have curled. And if I'm the skip, I'm holding the broom and somebody else is throwing the rock and there's two individuals sweeping. Every shot, everybody's involved in making that shot a success. And I think that if we can kind of get that idea that, as a skip, I also know what that individual can and can't do. And I'm not going to ask them to make a shot that is almost impossible for them. I will change it to make a shot that they can succeed at. And if I'm a sweeper, for instance, and I'm sweeping someone else's rock and they make that shot, I don't say, they made their shot, that makes me look bad. No, we realize that together we contributed to that shot and we celebrate that, we rejoice in that. And I think that goes a long way in helping that jealousy factor, that I can say, we rejoice in that. Your victory is our victory. My victory, is your victory. And instead of seeing it as my victory, your victory, no, it's our victory. It's God's victory. And I will do what I can do to help you. That might be praying. That might be encouraging. That might be whatever it is. But I think that goes such a long way.
Yeah, no, I would definitely second that as far as, teamwork is a huge diffuser of jealousy, because jealousy is usually, they look better than I do. It's these separate parties. But when it's teamwork, when it's unity, it's like, man, that's awesome. That's exciting, and I'm excited to be a part of this. When there's teamwork there, it really diffuses any of that conceit, whether I'm the champion of this and everyone else is kind of doing less well, or someone else is doing better, and you're like, oh man, I would definitely second that.
And we're better together. Get that in there for Ken. But we really are.
Heard that somewhere before.
And well communicated vision.
Yeah.
I think is key to that, because if everybody knows where we're going, where we want to go, then we're going to celebrate the success of getting there, no matter what department, no matter who's bringing it there, and maybe it might be the subcultures of the church that's happening, but because we know the vision and it's been communicated well, we're all excited as a team because we're going there, and I think that's really important.
I think from my experience that breaches in churches or splits in churches tend to happen from the top down, not from the bottom up. In other words, it starts at the leadership. It starts on your board. It starts on your pastoral team. Churches that fracture don't fracture because attenders start being unhappy. It happens because the leadership becomes unhappy with one another, right? And that's why this is so important. If you have a divided team at the top, the fracture, the tear will start at the top and it'll widen and it'll come all the way down and the church will split, right? And so this team idea is really, really, really critical. And I think that in order to affirm, not only does affirm have to happen in your office, it has to happen publicly on the platform, right? You need to affirm one another publicly on the platform. The congregation needs to perceive of you as a tight unit, as a team supporting one another. When you do that, you inoculate your church against factious diseases, against diseases that would come in and try to separate. Because the congregation, and we get this happening all the time, lay people get up and say, wow, our team really loves one another, our pastors really care for one another, it's obvious. They won't even bother to criticize any of us in front of each other because they know already that we love each other, and what they're going to get back is, is kind of like if you're criticizing someone's child, right? It's not.
So you're setting the culture by leading that way.
Yeah.
What about just kind of shifting gears a little bit? So building that culture of honor and encouraging each other. What if a staff member just totally fails? Flat on their face. So it's affecting the church and everybody's feeling that. How do you deal with that? How do people fail, and how do you deal with that as a lead pastor, Jim?
You asked me.
I'm asking you because I need to know.
How do you deal? First of all, very prayerfully and very carefully, because no matter what you do, and no matter how that person has failed, right, except for the most egregious of moral failures, people will be on their side in the church, right? People will take their side. And so I want to err on the side of generosity rather than the side of getting what needs to happen. Do you know what I mean? So I want to give that person lots of time. I want to give them lots of grace. I want to give them lots of opportunity to change. And usually there comes a point where you say, this person in this setting is just not going to work. They're not going to carry their weight. There's some issue that it's better for them to be somewhere else than here, right? Yeah. And that's going to take me understanding that that's going on, me having those frank conversations, me giving the person time to come to those conclusions. So we have conversations about because if there's a failure going on, I assume that the person is unhappy with themselves in this position. It's not just the performance that's a problem. They're unhappy with being here. And so that's what I really focus on. I'd say, obviously this doesn't fit well with you, right? Obviously something's going on here where there's anxiety. Why would you want to stay in a place where there's anxiety? Why would you want to work in a place that's so difficult, right? Why don't in the next 6 months, why don't you be praying about some other place where you could serve, where you can fit and you can be happy and you can enjoy ministry, because it's just not happening here, right? And then give them the time and pray.
So sometimes failure happens because of competency. They're not able to do it. Sometimes it happens because of character, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what about the risk component? How much do you encourage you guys to risk, and are you okay with them failing? Maybe Dan, you can talk to that as well. Do you encourage people to risk on your team, and to what level?
Oh, within reason. I think, everyone has to stretch themselves. We're always stretching ourselves. Often I wake up in the morning and my prayer is, Lord, help me today. because I know that what I'm facing, what I'm doing, I can't do on my own strength. I need you. I need your wisdom. I need your guidance. I need your skill set sometimes. I need your creativity. And hopefully our areas of ministry are stretching our staff members, and they're stretching themselves. And so if they're stretching themselves, that means that there's times where they're doing things that are new to them. They are approaching a situation that they've never seen before, that they never dealt with before. And when we do that, we do the best we can do. And I think that's a part of that failing. Has that staff member done the best that he or she can do? And if they're doing their best and they've made a mistake, for instance, are they learning from that mistake? We all make mistakes. If we could go back, could we do things differently? Probably. But if we had the same knowledge and had the same skill set, maybe we would do exactly the same thing. But they're learning and they're developing. And I think that's the important thing. Are you learning? Are you developing? And if you're doing that, a lot of mistakes can be redeemable with grace. We want to create an atmosphere of grace. God deals with us graciously. And I think that if there's an aspect of grace, that can go such a long way.
The Jim Collins, From Good to Great, wrote a book called How the Mighty Fall. And in the book, he talks about huge corporations that look like they were doing great and they crash, right? And some of the time it's because they take risk that eventually kills them, right? And so we all read that book as a staff, and the take-home lesson was, when we're facing risks, there's three questions to ask. The first question is, what's the upside? If this goes really, really well, what do we have to gain? The second question is, what's the downside? If this goes really, really badly, right, what do we have to lose, right? The third question is, can we afford the loss? And if you can't answer that third question, can we afford the loss affirmatively, don't do it. He talked in terms of the shuttle disaster where it blew up because of those O-rings and the gas, right? They knew there was a potential that those O-rings would fail before they launched. They did it anyway. What did they have to gain? They gained about a day, an advantage of a day getting the launch done earlier. What did they have to lose? 7 people's lives, $7 billion worth of space shuttle, and about 10 years to the space shuttle program. He said if they've asked those questions, they'd say, no, don't do it. Wait a day. Wait a day till the temperature changes and we can launch. And so our staff would say, well, we're going to do this risky thing. What do you have to gain? What do you have to lose? Can we afford the loss?
That's great.
Do it.
And I think, for rookies in ministry, I think that comes with wisdom and time. And so, that's something we want to enforce. But rookies who don't have that wide of a perspective, I think what Dan was saying is, is this a failure, but like they tried their hardest and failed, or is this a failure just because they're like, whatever, I'll just let it happen? I think that's is a big difference as we are still bringing. As rookies are growing and expanding in our, there's calculated risk, and and not just kind of going with it.
Yeah. So, Chris, real quickly, have you ever planned an event that's just totally flopped or something like that, or a program?
Oh yeah. Actually, one of the ones I thought of that just really hit me that I learned the most from, because that's another thing about failure is sometimes we learn the most out of failure. And I was very excited to breach topics on relationships and sexuality, because the world out there is saying all sorts of things, and we needed to bring a positive side, God's truth side, to those topics. And so right off the get-go, when I first started at CLCC, these are topics I wanted to talk about. So I did, and it happened on the youth night, and then the next day in the office, Jim comes and is like, "Hey, so what'd you talk about last week? And heard you were talking about sex and da da da." And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, I got a phone call from a parent, and they were a little shaken up and this whole thing." And through that whole conversation, I realized Jim was on board with me about bringing up this topic, but that for individual families, they are on a different level as far as when this topic needs to be breached. The awareness, so we started looking at, okay, well, how does the school breach this? How does, and so through all this process, through this failure, it was like, okay, parents need notice. They definitely they need to be the ones in control of. Yeah, I will let you talk to my kids about this, or I'll just because we said what, we're not going to stop for one or two individual families because we think it's important, but we'll give you the power to say, my kid, talk to my kid about this, or no, thank you. And so that was a big whoops that I was able to learn from, and we were able to catch, without too much damage being done.
Yeah. So you pick it up and learn. Go ahead, Lucas.
One thing I would say in that is fail together.
Yeah.
Even if like your lead pastor's not involved, like have that conversation. So fail together, so you can bring different perspective to that too, to learn those lessons. Because sometimes we're too short-sighted to see it because it's right in front of us. It's good to have other perspective, and so if you do fail, don't be scared to bring that up in staff meeting. Go, well, we tried this, didn't work out quite the way. Any thoughts? And fail together as a team. I think that would be.
Let me ask you, Lucas, is that also true on a character level? When there's failure in our character, okay, do you want to speak into that?
Yeah, on a character level, there's a lot at play there. Because as hard as it is to walk to your staff member or your lead pastor and go, I failed at the sex talk on a Tuesday night. Yeah. It's another thing to go, I failed in my own sex stuff, or
Sure.
whatever that might be, integrity, morality. I went in the canteen and took $5 out. Like those moral issues, those character integrity issues. I think it's important for anybody who's sitting watching this, who is plagued in their own consciousness about moral issues. First, I would say to lead pastors, grace. Grace. And to those that are struggling, and if you're a lead pastor, same thing. That it is not worth it, because everything that's going on inside of you is undermining everything that you're doing. It's absolutely undermining everything that you're doing. You can't preach passionately. You might have charisma, but there's a stunted growth to your ministry right off the get-go. And it's not worth it at all. At all. There's zero upside. Zero. Actually, it's in the red. And so to, lead pastors, be a safe place. Those that might be facing integrity issues, know that you're in a safe place and deal, because it's not worth it.
Because the longer it stays in the dark, the more Satan can use that, right?
Absolutely, because the longer it stays in the dark, it's going to come out at some point. And either save what you do have, or let it go to ruin as you're building the kingdom of God, because it's going to come out. Bible promises us that. And so
Better now than later.
Better now than later, and better in an environment of grace than an environment of getting busted and now nobody even believes that I'm repentant. Right? Because I didn't come up clean on my own. So it changes everything. And so,
Jim, just is there something you do on your team just to create an environment of transparency so that character issues can be discussed?
I think that teaming people together with accountability partners does that, right? So they can talk to one another. I think in our staff meetings, and we meet for pretty long staff meetings every week, we can discuss anything. And we also learn that, use that as a teaching time. So every week I bring another article to talk about, and from time to time it'll be character issues or whatever. So so keep that openness that you can dialogue together, and again, just this freedom of saying I can say anything I want in this environment, and it's safe, right? And we've heard everything said in those environments, and it's a safe place. So.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you all for your input today and your participation in this panel. We've discussed and discovered many great topics, you know, and things that really relate to working on a staff and with pastors and teams, and so I know it's been beneficial for me, and I hope it's been beneficial for you, and I hope it's been beneficial for everybody watching on the webinar. But we want to keep these issues of communication and healthy staffs as a high priority in our district, and we have to keep working on team and building a culture. I think that's one kind of takeaway from me, even just from Jim's comment, is we are responsible for the cultures that we build as leaders, and so for healthy staffs, it really rises and falls on us as leaders to make sure that we're contributing and that we're communicating and that we're setting the pace. So thank you guys for being here today, and Dave, you had a couple comments.
There's something fabulous about learning together, and I appreciate the story, appreciate the transparency, and I believe that in the days ahead there's even more opportunities, like Ben's saying, right, to talk together and share. And I think we're going to be doing another conversation in September 14th, to talk about British Columbia and the Yukon district, a fresh look at the people groups within our district, and it's going to be exciting to unpack some of that. September 14th, 2012. So good days. Thanks for being a part of this, and
Thank you.
Love your leadership style, and all that you bring to this conversation has been fabulous. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for your help as well, Ben.
Thanks, Dave. It's
You're
been great.
awesome.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.